Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first Comic Capers annual. This is me, Phil. I figured for the first annual would have to go big or go home, so I got a big legend of the industry, Mr. J.M. DeMatteis. Hello, sir.
Hey, how are you?
Good. And I know we've talked before, and I keep saying I keep wanting to do your talk about your Captain America run, so I figured this was a great opportunity, especially after the success of the Falcon and Winter Soldier.
And let's just pray I remember anything about it.
Hey, anything you have to say about this will be gold. But yeah, before we jump into your comic run, did you watch the Falcon and Winter Soldier?
I have not seen it. I have not seen any. I haven't seen any of the Disney Plus stuff. I'll probably catch up with it. I'm not one of the people that like runs and sees these things immediately, but I eventually catch up with all of it. There's so much stuff out there right now to watch on so many platforms, and there's just so much that one can take in.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at some point I'll just dive in and probably blitz all the Marvel stuff on Disney like in a month, and just watch it all.
Yeah, it's not too bad because I think WandaVision was 9 episodes, but like Falcon and Winter Soldier was only 6, and I think.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't realize it was that short.
Yeah, and Loki just started last week, and I think that's only going to be 6 too. So yeah, so some of them are really binge. You could just like binge them in an afternoon or something.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. I will catch up with them though.
Yes,
I know that Zach and I got a thank you in the credits on the Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
So that was nice to hear. Someone sent me a screen capture.
Yes, I'm old enough to remember. We were lucky when we used to get maybe one superhero movie a year, if that.
If that, and the question was, would it be any good? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think they've realized. Sorry, I think they've realized they should take this stuff more seriously and like stick as close as they can to the source material.
Yeah, well, and also there's also just the fact that the technology can do this now. Not that long ago, they really didn't have the technology to do it. It's amazing that even going back to the Tim Burton movies, that they look as good as they did for when they were done, or the original, Chris Reeve Superman movie, which remains my favorite superhero movie of all time to this day.
Oh yeah, that was like my first, exposure to superhero like movies and stuff. Love Christopher Reeve.
Yeah, I would say if someone would go back in time and tell my little, 8 or 10-year-old self that you could basically, well, obviously we haven't been going to the movies, but in a normal time, we could go to the movies virtually every week or turn on TV almost every night and see a really well done superhero show. My little self would just faint from excitement. He wouldn't be able to take it in.
Oh, I know. All right, so I'm sorry I got us off track, but let's get to you.
That's okay.
Captain America run. All right, so do you remember when you first got the assignment to write Captain America?
My Captain America run started in a very goofy way. Before I was officially at Marvel, before Jim Shooter gave me a contract and signed me up as a regular, I was doing stuff at DC. I started at DC. And I'd gotten my foot in the door with Jim, who liked my work. So he would throw me, let me just shut my mail so we're not booping through this whole thing. And so he would throw me, a fill in here, a fill in there, a little assignment here, a little assignment there, just to kind of keep that door open for me. And one of the things that he threw me, going back to what we just started with, back in the 70s, there were these, given this name, well, you have to put it in the context of the times, less than stellar Captain America TV movies. Red Brown on a motorcycle and that whole thing. So they had done one and they had a second one coming up. And Jim said, we want to do a Marvel Treasury edition that ties in to the next Captain America TV movie. So I wrote this whole thing, a giant story for this Marvel Treasury edition that featured Captain America in Hollywood getting involved with the people that were making the movie. And somebody woke up one day and went, let's not do that. And so we put that aside. But I think it was Jim Salicrup, who was editing Captain America at the time, and by this point I had officially kind of come over to Marvel. Said, why don't we take that Treasury idea, take out the real life people that were involved with the TV movie, but keep the idea we could turn it into three issues of the regular Captain America book. So I wasn't given the assignment of writing Captain America regularly. It was like a 3-issue fill-in essentially, and it ended up being kind of my tryout. And that was I guess I must have been vaguely familiar with Zek's work because he probably had done Master of Kung Fu around then, maybe back in those days. But I wasn't like super familiar with his work. But Zek drew the story, and it all turned out pretty well. I can go back in time and go, oh God, I would have done this differently or that differently. I was still really new. But overall, it turned out well. And pretty soon I was writing the book on a regular basis.
So that was gonna be my first question. Is like, did you ask for the book? Did they assign it to you? So you it was basically almost like a tryout, and they liked what you did. So it's like,
yeah, that's kind of how it worked out. That's how it worked out. I didn't know at the time it was a tryout. It was just like, especially in the early part of your career, you're just happy to do any. Oh, they want me to write a Captain America story? This is great. All right, I wasn't even thinking this is going to turn into a regular gig or anything like that, and then it did. And one of the things you learn. Writing these characters is you have a different relationship with them when you write them than you do when you read about them. I always enjoyed Captain America. I loved, anything that Kirby drew with Captain America, Stan and Gene Colan and later on, guys like Steve Englehart, who did such a brilliant run, one of the great runs on Captain America. So I always enjoyed the character, but I would never say he was like, oh, if I'm going to list my favorite characters, was he at the top of the list? He wasn't. But then you start to write a character, and you get to know them the way that you get to know another human being. You really get to know them deeply, psychologically, emotionally, even spiritually. And so you connect with them in a totally different way. And that's what happened with Steve Rogers. I really got to know him and fell in love with the character in a way that I never had as a reader. Again, totally enjoyed the character as a reader, read it loyally for years, but not at the level that I fell in love with the character when I was writing Captain America.
Well, yeah, I mean, to write a great story, don't you kind of have to connect with the character like that? I mean, of course you're going to connect because it's like his words are your words coming from his mind.
Yeah, it's like your psyche and his psyche have to merge somehow. And I say his because they're part of us and our imagination, but they're like these individual entities that really kind of exist. We're all feeding into this character for years and years, and then they take on a life of their own. And so it's like we're interacting with another person, and then we bring our point of view and our perspective and our life experiences and apply that to these characters.
And is it a little more difficult or even just intimidating writing Captain America just because it's like, yeah, on a certain level, he is like just like an ordinary guy, but it's like, almost every issue, he kind of has to have these words of wisdom. He has to speak these words of inspiration. I mean, he's led the Avengers. I mean, he's had gods like Thor and Hercules following him. It's like the guy has to be like inspirational. Is it kind of like intimidating, kind of having to come up with like all this inspirational stuff over and over?
No, I don't remember it being intimidating at all, really. I just, you just sort of, you dive in, and as I always say, it's like you get out your little saw, you cut off the top of the character's head, you get your flashlight, you start rooting around in their psyche, you find the things that interest you and that you connect to, and off you go. And in terms of the inspirational part of Cap's character, I always liked that. I'm a big fan of speechifying. I like courtroom shows. I love when the lawyers get up and give their impassioned speeches. I love Rod Serling when his characters would go off and give these incredible, poetic speeches, monologues, and things. So that's very natural to me, and I like that in Cap. I like his idealism and his passion because it resonated with my own idealism and passion and gave me a place to express it. I don't walk around in my own personal life giving speeches, so at least there I could do it.
It's a place to vent.
That's right.
Because I just asked that because I'm like, like you've done great runs on Spider-Man and stuff, but it's like Peter Parker basically was just an ordinary guy. I mean, Steve Rogers started that way, but is Captain America now almost like a folk hero almost on a level of...
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's both, and that's the push-pull with a character like that.
Mm.
Because on one hand, the same thing with Superman in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
On one hand, he's a symbol of something that could resonate. You just have to look at him. People that have never read a Captain America comic or even seen a movie, they're going to recognize him and know who and what he is and what he resonates with and what he represents. But you got to keep him human too.
Yeah.
Or else there's nothing to relate to. If something is just a symbol, then where's your story? So that's the push-pull. One of the great things that I inherited was the stuff that Roger Stern and John Byrne had built.
Yes.
They had a very short but really brilliant run on that book. And Roger had established that Steve had a personal life. Well, what a gift, to have that there. Because for years, he never had anything really vaguely resembling. He was always more or less Captain America. Right. There was 5 minutes in the 60s where Stan made him a cop. And he was a cop for like 2.5 issues, and then that was like forgotten. So he had a life, he had a girlfriend, and it opened up, a chance to really humanize him. So I really liked that. I fell in love with Bernie as a character. I loved that relationship. Was as much fun for me as writing Peter and Mary Jane. I really liked their relationship. I don't know if she even exists in the Marvel Universe anymore. But it was a great relationship, and she was a really strong and interesting character. So that was the push pull. You want your story when you're writing Captain America. The stories always have to be there. Always has to be that bigger theme going on, because as I've said and as many people have said, Cap represents. He doesn't represent the American reality. Anyone who thinks he represents a political party or this or that, they got it completely wrong. He represents the highest ideals. We've all seen all the many ways this country has fallen short, but there are fundamental ideals that we all aspire to. And he is the embodiment of the best in our country and really in the best in us. And the wonderful thing about the stories are written in the gap between the ideal and the reality. That makes for a great Captain America story. And then if you bring in the human aspects of Steve and weave that in, then you've got a really good story.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of enjoy those kind of stories more, like you were talking about, like where he's like he has a social life and he's actually more like a superhero. Like, I mean, it's okay when he's working for S.H.I.E.L.D. or he's like almost like a soldier. Right. I enjoyed like the where it's like he's like an ordinary guy. He has a personal life, and then he just throws on a costume like any other superhero. And
right,
yeah. And I'm glad to start. I reread some of your run for this talk, and it's my memory playing tricks on me. For some reason, I thought that you had created Bernie, but yeah, I was like, oh no, that must have been Roger Stern who created Bernie.
That was Stern and Byrne. Bernie came from that run. And again, the run wasn't very long, so what I got to do was take that character and really develop her. And that's when we all play in this shared universe. That's the way it works. I may create a character. Leave a book, and then someone else comes along and takes the foundation that I've laid down and builds it up into something else. And that's sort of what happened with Bernie and some of those elements in Roger's amazing run. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say, this came up in the last interview. Is there? I mean, so you like when people take your stuff and like run with it? I mean, or is there always a kind of fear or it's like, oh no, if it's somebody maybe you don't know, or or you're just like, oh, are they going to honor this character?
It's both reactions exist. It's sort of like on one hand, they're your babies. And you don't want anyone else to touch them. On the other hand, you want these characters to live on, I was just looking, Chris Cantwell, who's writing Iron Man now. And someone tweeted an image from a recent issue that had, it was Ben Reilly, it was the Gargoyle, and it was the Fabulous Frogman, 3 of my characters, and it was like, oh, it's really just nice to see them out there still functioning in the Marvel Universe, So there's that part where you want these characters to live on. At the same time, you feel very protective of them. So part of you doesn't want to read what they're doing with them, because it may not jive with what's in your head, but you're happy that they're out there. And it's the same thing, that I've done with other people's characters. I'm sure I've done things with other people's characters where they've looked at it and got, oh my God, he does not understand my character, completely screwed it up. Or maybe someone else said, oh, I'm so happy that he continued that story and deepened that character or whatever. And, that's where the question of who created what in a shared universe gets very difficult, because person A may create something. He or she may write that first story or the first 6 stories. And then I may come along, or some other writer may come along and completely deepen and expand that character and add mythology and do so many things. But the creator is that person that did the first stories, which is correct. And at the same time, though, it's incorrect because someone else has come along and added to that. Even we're talking about Captain America. Let's look at Baron Zemo.
Yes.
Right? Perfect example. First of all, you had the original Baron Zemo that Stan and Jack created, right? Who wasn't really around all that long in the scheme of things. And then Roy Thomas and Tony Isabella do a one-off, just a one-issue story with this villain called the Phoenix. And at the end, it turns out it's the son of Zemo when he falls in a vat of something, and that's the end of him for 15 years or something. And then Zek and I come along, and we pull that character out, and we build that character up and develop that character into a major villain in the Marvel Universe. And then I guess when they do Thunderbolts, they take him and they develop him even more. It's so who created what? I feel like I had a big part in making Zemo who he is today in the Marvel Universe, but you can't take away from, Roy Thomas and Tony Isabella and Sal Buscema who did that, or from Stan and Jack who created, so who's the creator? It's a very iffy thing. It's a very iffy thing. So we're all just, it's like this giant ocean, and we're all pouring our cups of water into it, and it all becomes part of the big ocean.
I mean, I think you play a big part, because if you hadn't brought that character back, would anyone have brought the son of Zemo back who appeared in one issue?
Yeah, you never know. Maybe 10 years after that, or 15 years after, you never know. Because that's the funny thing about comics, is sometimes the most obscure characters pop up again and suddenly become something they never were in the first place. Who'd have ever thought we'd have a Guardians of the Galaxy movie, and then suddenly this huge thing of these really obscure characters that were, not even B-level, they were maybe D-level Marvel characters that are now considered A-level.
Oh, that was another question I was going to ask you when we were talking Falcon and Winter Soldier. If they gave you hey, total creative freedom, you can bring anybody, you can write the show or the movie, any character from the Marvel Universe.
Wow.
Who would you want to write? Would it be a well-known person, or would you want to flesh out someone who's lesser?
Oh, we're not talking about Captain America. We're talking any Marvel, anything?
Anybody. Yeah.
That's a great question. I like the supernatural characters. I'd love to do Doctor Strange. Now, obviously, they've done Doctor Strange, but I'm just saying, if we're just fantasizing, Doctor Strange or the Silver Surfer, that's another character that I really adore. That we haven't really seen done yet in the classic way. But obscure characters. When I did the Defenders years ago, the Defenders was basically, I turned it into sort of the proto Justice League Dark. It was Marvel's supernatural team. And I think something like that would be really fun to write, with characters like my Gargoyle character and Son of Satan and all, Devil Slayer, all these characters that we used back then, sort of like a Marvel's version of Justice League Dark. I think that would make a great show.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Cause I read one or two issues, because they tied in with one of your Captain America issues. And I'm just I'm about to fall down the Defenders rabbit hole with, these issues. I'm like, oh, this looks good.
Yeah, that was all my early gigs at Marvel. I think the regular books I got at the beginning, I think about it now, what a great thing. This is what I got at the beginning at Marvel. I was writing Captain America, the Defenders, and Marvel Team Up all at the same time. So that was a great way to start my Marvel career, for sure.
Okay, not to take us too far off track, but when you write a Marvel Team Up, do they do they give you suggestions who to put in there every issue, or do you have freedom?
My recollection is that Tom DeFalco was the editor, and he gave me the freedom to basically pick whoever I wanted. And as with many things, a lot of times I picked obscure characters, because if you have an obscure character, or my Defenders characters, the whole team was basically filled with obscure characters, because you have more freedom. It took me, I don't know, 5 months, 6 months to really figure out how to do that book, because, the classic team up thing is character A meets character B. They misunderstand each other. They fight with each other. Then they go, oh, we shouldn't be fighting. And they fight the villain. Story's over. How do you make month after month? And I wrote that book for, I think, 3 years. For month after month, how do you make a meaningful team up story. And what I finally tumbled to is that, and also you can't really impact the greater continuity.
Yeah.
Because someone else is usually writing those characters. Even with Spider-Man, Tom DeFalco was editing the Spider-Man books at the time, and they very much included me, in the writers' meetings and things like that, even though I was just writing that team-up book over in the corner. But you can't really impact the continuity in a profound way. So what I discovered was you can still write stories that have emotional meaning, that have some depth, that put the characters through something that is of value and of worth and that we can relate to psychologically and emotionally. And, eventually after working on the book for X number of months, that just sort of started to happen naturally. And there's some stories in that run that I can still look back on and go, that's pretty good stuff. There are a few that I don't want to see ever again, but there are a few that I am very happy with to this day.
Oh, I'm sure you probably helped when you teamed Spider-Man up with Captain America. You're like, oh, hey, I'm writing the Captain America book. I can do
right. That kind of stuff was always good. That's why I would sometimes pull characters out of the Defenders, because the writer of the Defenders or Captain America is not going to yell at me for what I did in Marvel Team Up. He's going to say, that was a good job. Good work.
But okay, so back to the Baron Zemo. So what was the inspiration for bringing him back, or did you just like the character? Do you just saw the potential?
I just, themes tend to emerge in one's work, and they often emerge unconsciously, and you're not thinking about it. Then, a couple of years go by and you look at your work and realize, oh, I'm very into fathers and sons and that struggle, family and dysfunction and all that. So, the son of Zemo, who has got this revenge thing going on about his father, but is still in some weird way trying to prove himself to his father and prove, his worth. And then, later on I had the Red Skull come in to become a father figure to him, but he's just another manipulative, crazy person. And so I like that. I like that sort of psychological father and son thing running through Zemo. And he's trying to prove something that he doesn't need to prove at all, and that he probably shouldn't be trying to prove, because his father was a madman. But when you grow up with lunacy, you don't think you're growing up with lunacy. You think you're growing up in a normal world. It's only later, if you can step outside of that you discover that it's crazy. So he was an interesting character to play with. Plus, larger than life. I kind of played with, they had established that whole adhesive X thing for the original Baron Zemo, where he couldn't get his mask off. And I looked at the Roy Thomas story, and he'd fallen in this vat. So I thought, well, great. So let's make him hideously scarred and disfigured so he can never take his mask off because he doesn't want to show his face. It's kind of paralleled his father, but it was something different. And one more reason to make him, hate Cap, even though it was his own actions that brought it upon himself, So he was an interesting character. And I think it was in Captain America that Mike and I first came up with Vermin, who later became so important in Kraven's Last Hunt. And so, and then the other character that I really feel good about looking back is, and we talk about making Steve real, was Arnie Roth.
Yes.
Who was Cap's best friend growing up, who I created this character, because by then it was the 80s. So it was conceivable that someone that he grew up with would still be around. He'd be a guy in his, at that point, probably late 50s or something like that, and one of the first, if not the first gay supporting character in a Marvel comic. Maybe there was someone else floating around back then, but if there weren't a lot of them. And what I realized years later, of course, the whole story with Arnie was Cap's best friend growing up. He was the tough guy. He was Scrawny Steve's protector. They were best buddies. He got him out of scrapes. They basically took Arnie Roth backstory and they grafted it onto Bucky in the movies. Yeah. And I was so dense, I needed someone to point that out to me. And I went, oh, you're right. And the great thing about that character is now it's all these years later, and I still, I get someone on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, some young gay person who read that story at a pivotal time in their life, and how much it meant to them to have that representation in a comic book and to have that character treated respectfully and lovingly, and that's something that's really sort of come over the years, and it's I'm always amazed and gratified, because when you're writing this stuff, you're just writing. You're not thinking. I was never thinking about making a statement or going, I will now give Captain America a gay best friend because I will want represent. No, it just seemed, it all flowed logically. Cap His girlfriend was Jewish. His other best friend, Sam Wilson, was a black guy. So I thought, yeah, and again, he's the broad tent of America. So of course he would surround himself with a broad tent like that, and it just seemed natural for that character. So yeah, Arnie was a great character.
But yeah, Bernie and Arnie, I mean, I enjoy their characters. They just seem like very real people.
Mm-hmm.
As quite the contrast, all of Captain America's adventures. I mean, Zemo sending, mutant mutates after him and stuff. And, all this crazy stuff. He's going to the future and stuff. But it's like, yeah, he's grounded by these very real characters.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, that's important to give us somebody to relate to. Because if I think back, being a kid reading Captain America, like Stan and Jack, those were great action adventure stories.
Mm-hmm.
There was not a lot of deep character work beyond, oh, Bucky's dead. You get the occasional, oh, Bucky's dead.
Yeah.
You read those stories for the big action and that incredible Kirby artwork and these concepts that would come flying out of his brain, But my approach is I have to get into the character's head. It's just who I am. I write from the character out. I don't write from the plot in or the concept in. Occasionally those things happen, but in general, as a general rule, I write from the character out. So I had to have those psychological and emotional hooks to keep it interesting for me.
Oh yeah, I mean, again, I think you nailed it on the head. I didn't even realize. It's just that's why I like your stories and again, Roger Stern before you, Mark Gruenwald after you. It's just I like when he's grounded with real characters because like the Stan stuff and even like some of the more current stuff, he's just like surrounded with like SHIELD agents or other superheroes. There's not like people from the real world there to ground him. It's
right. Show me a human being, no matter who you are.
Yeah,
you're a human being underneath that mask. Yeah.
So were there any big talks? I mean, speaking of Arnie, I mean, again, it was like the early 80s, mid 80s.
Yeah.
Was there any
early 80s? Yeah.
Was there anything from editorial or anything where it's just like any pushback about making Arnie gay or anything or?
Not at first. Not at first. And I think it just kind of slipped. You didn't come out then and say, "Hi, Steve, I'm gay." He didn't identify, but he was with his roommate who he loved. And, and Steve would speak about their relationship and compare it to his relationship and Bernie. So it was pretty clear without putting a big arrow going, he's gay, But there was a point when we were later on, after Zek had left the book, when I had a year-long story with the whole Red Skull epic that was going on. And the Skull captures Arnie and dresses him up like Joel Grey in Cabaret, like a 1930s or Berlin cabaret performer, and makes him give this humiliating performance where he speaks of himself in these horrible terms, And in the speech, it's very, very clear, and it's very underlined because the Skull's trying to humiliate him that Arnie is gay. And I remember that the editor-in-chief, Tim Shooter, at the time, rewrote some of that dialogue and toned it down because he thought it was too direct somehow. But the great thing was then you turned the page, and that was where Steve gives the big speech comparing Arnie's love for his boyfriend Michael to Steve's love for Bernie. So it's completely clear. So they changed, this page, but I never quite looked at the next page to realize that it was even clearer on the next page. But that might have been the only time there was any sort of shift or change or pushback. Considering the time, I think I worked on that book from like 81 to 83 or 80 to 83, somewhere in there, but it was 2.5 or 3 years. And there was no pushback about that at all, really, aside from that one incident.
Oh, good. Glad to hear. Yeah, it's just at that time, I just wasn't sure if they were, if they were like, I don't know,
It might have just gone under everybody's radar. Maybe they weren't paying attention. It's very possible, that the people that would have objected weren't reading it that closely.
And another character, Jack Monroe, Nomad.
Right. So that was because, I was a huge fan of Englehart's run. I loved that Nomad storyline that he did. And I also loved the storyline where they brought back the Captain Bucky of the 50s. Because for me, I remember reading that, I guess I was a teenager when I read that. And I didn't know about that 1950s Captain America. I never knew that happened. you know? And so I thought, what a brilliant way to bring these characters in and update them. And it was fascinating. And again, there's rarely is it like, oh, I have a great, brilliant new idea. It just sort of flowed. And I thought, what if we brought him back? And suddenly Jack, stepped into the book, and there was instant chemistry between Jack and Steve. And he suddenly, because he first of all, the name Jack Maurer, he didn't have a name before. We gave him that name and really gave him a character, because he didn't really have a character before that. So that's the same thing about creation. Here's this character that was created in the 50s. And suddenly, we turned him into a three-dimensional human being, but we didn't create him. So, and then other people, I think, didn't Fabian do a whole Nomad miniseries after that? And so, everybody builds on each other that way. So he was just a great element for the book, really great element for the book. And then I thought, Bucky, it's the time for Bucky is long past. Who could he be? And so Cap pulls out the old Nomad costume, and now we have, Captain America Nomad. And it worked out really nicely.
I mean, yeah, I think those two characters got along so well too, because like Jack Monroe was a man out of time also, because
right, exactly. And who better, that's why he went to Steve, because who better to understand what he's going through than Steve Rogers.
So I thought those two made like the perfect team. Yeah, I just didn't know did you have like an affinity for Nomad, because one of your first stories you had what was another Red Skull story where
oh, I forgot about that. That's the one that was originally in the Treasury edition.
Yeah.
So clearly I don't remember, but clearly I must have. Again, I love that Englehart run. So I probably was just playing with the different mythologies, and I think there was the Ameridroid was in that story, who was from, I think, a Steve Gerber story. Also a huge Steve Gerber fan. He had a very, very, very short run on Cap. And that was very strange and interesting, as everything that Gerber wrote was. So yeah, I just building on what had come before.
So much stuff came from your run, but no, go ahead. I didn't want to.
No, it's a funny thing, because when the book was coming out, and again, there was no internet, and I probably wasn't going to tons of conventions in those days, so I didn't get a lot of feedback. I didn't get a lot beyond like the letters that were, on the letters page. So I had no idea whether that run was a dud, or whether people appreciated it, or what it was, if I pleased my editor and I pleased myself, that was about it, and my artist. And then over the years, I've watched, when I go to conventions, and people, more and more coming up with that run and saying how much they loved it and how much it meant to them. And it's a really nice thing, especially because at the time I had no clue whether it was good, bad, or indifferent. I was just, doing my gig and doing the best I could.
Having fun.
Yeah. Having fun. And working with Zach, doesn't get better than that. It was like, that was our rehearsal. We had, a couple of years of rehearsal for Craven's Last Hunt, because by the time we stepped in to work on Craven, we had already worked out all the kinks in our collaboration. So we were just, firing on all cylinders, as the cliche goes, but we really were. And then Paul Neary did the last year of the book and did an excellent job as well.
And you mentioned Sam Wilson. I mean, there were some of those backups where, like, what was it? He's running for this. Was it the Senate or Congress?
He was running for Congress. Yeah.
So was that story always supposed to go the way? Because I don't think he made it. Or were there ever talks of like, oh, hey, could we do Senator Sam Wilson?
Oh yeah. Well, I think the way it played was he lost the election. That's what happened. But that story came about because they had set up a storyline back in the Englehart run. But then Steve left the book, so he never finished it. So we don't know where he was going with it. But I don't know if anyone remembers the story, but they basically said that Sam Wilson wasn't really Sam Wilson, this great, upstanding, decent human being that we knew and loved. And someone dug up when I was like 14 or something, wrote this letter to Captain America comic, raving about the Falcon and how much I loved him. I'd completely forgotten about it, And it's like, well, I guess I really like the Falcon. I took the time to write this crazy letter raving about him. But anyway, so the storyline that was that the Red Skull had used the Cosmic Cube, that Sam Wilson was really this drug-selling pimp, horrible human being, and the Red Skull changed his personality with the Cosmic Cube so he could implant an agent, basically, with Captain America. I just thought that was, again, I'm not putting it on Steve, because Steve he only started the storyline, and knowing Steve, he had brilliant places to go with it. But the way it ended up, they let that basically stand. Sam kind of came back to himself at the end, but they never contradicted the fact that that's who he really was. And I thought that was, here you have one of Marvel's first black characters, really, and who's gone on to become a very classic character, and that you're basically saying he was a drug peddling pimp. That really bothered me and offended me. So what I did with that backup story, I was looking for some sort of psychological meat behind that. What happened? What trauma did Sam go through that the character was called Snap Wilson, and I called the storyline Snapping. What made his mind snap that he kind of had to hide behind another personality and it turns out because of the violence that he experienced as a child, that his father was a preacher and his father was murdered and all these other things. So I wanted to kind of balance that story out and say, no, Sam Wilson really is, honest to God, this good and decent guy. He is not this 1970s blaxploitation cliche that they said he was in that storyline.
Oh, that's you have to, when you get a chance, watch Falcon and Winter Soldier, because it is so good. They deal with the issue of race and stuff. Like Sam even meets Isaiah Bradley, who tells him, the government, they screwed me over. They're not never going to let a black man be Captain America. And yeah, there's lots.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I will absolutely check it out.
And too, your buddy Zemo's in there too.
Right,
so,
right.
Like I said, if you hadn't brought that character back, I saw so many people on the internet. They're like, I love Zemo. He's such a villain. Just he has such an such an aristocratic, uppity attitude in this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, and then, like you were saying, you gave him the face just like his father. That was like I always say it. That was like I think the last big secret comics we're able to keep is the Thunderbolts reveal at the end of issue 1 when Zemo pulls off that Citizen V mask and you just see that face and he's like, know. Yeah. So yes, I'm like saying you should be proud of that. They've done so much with Zemo since.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. And again, at the time, you're just like we're all doing. We're just trying to write the story of the month. Oh, I got another story this month. Got to get it out. What can we do? What can be fun? What can be good?
It just boggles my mind. It's like, the characters were here before us. They'll be here after we're long gone.
I know. And that's what I mean. And because we're all contributing to this shared universe, it's an interesting thing. It's so different than just going off and being the author of your own work. You're never completely the author, because the minute you pour that cup into the ocean of the Marvel universe or the ocean of the DC universe, it becomes part of something bigger, just as you said, that will go on and on and on. And hopefully we at least get to see those characters now these days developed in other media. They'll cut us a nice little check to go with that. It's a nice thing. It's a very nice thing.
And like you were saying, it's weird. It's like, well, if someone gets the credit once it hits live action, who gets the credit? Because there was an issue recently, I think, was it Brubaker, where it's like, he didn't create Bucky Barnes, but he created the concept of the Winter Soldier. So it's
right. Yeah. So exactly that. There's a perfect example. He took this character that existed, for decades and decades, but turned it into something very different. So, hopefully the company recognizes everyone that's contributed, which is why I think, Zek and I got our thank you with the Winter Soldier show, because they recognize that, yes, we were very pivotal in the development of that character.
And okay, you mentioned your the Red Skull story towards the end of your run. Very good story, but the Swan Song, was there ever any talks like, oh, you're killing the Red Skull?
No one. There was no pushback. When you're killing a character,
well, it's comics too.
In comics, there's two things simultaneously going on in your brain. One is, I have to treat this as if this is real. This is the death of the Red Skull, and he's never coming back. Yeah. And that's the way I wrote that. The second thing is, this is that ocean of the Marvel Universe. He'll be back. He's going to be back. Yeah. The question is, how long do they wait? How well do they do it when they bring him back? The problem with me, which I don't know whether we've talked about this, but with what happened, I was building up this year-long story with Cap and the Red Skull, where basically the Skull threatens everyone in Steve's life. They're all nearly killed. He ages Captain America, so they're both old men by the end of the story. These two old men grappling together. where that story was leading was when the Skull dies, it's a turning point for Captain America. He decides that for like, at that point, it's 40 years since World War II. And he realizes, all I've been doing is punching people in the face, dropping buildings on the bad guys' heads. There's got to be another way to have a positive impact on the world. There's got to be a better way to change the world. And he begins to question what it is. Hurls his shield into the East River, and essentially goes on this journey to become a global peace activist, in the course of which all the other heroes in the Marvel Universe turn against him. The government turns against him. The only allies he can find are Doctor Doom and the Submariner. It had this whole epic thing planned out.
Wow.
And Captain America 300 was supposed to be double-sized, and as I recall, I wrote a full double-sized issue. And then Mark Grunwald, my editor, approved the storyline. I was even I might have been a plot or two into the new storyline, and Shooter decided that he didn't like it. His line was, and again, I say this with all the respect because he's the editor-in-chief. That's his job. He has to decide what he thinks is going to work or not work in this line of books that he's the ultimate custodian of. So, no ill will there. At the time, I was pissed off, but, you give it a little time and room and you realize it's really not a big deal. A man's just doing his job. But Jim decided that his vision of Captain America did not mesh with what I was doing. He didn't think Captain America would do this. I thought it would have, especially if you think about it, it's 1983. If we had done that story, that would have been unlike anything ever done in comics up to that point. I mean, to see Captain America reject violence and try to find another way, and at the end of which he was going to be assassinated by Jack Monroe, who flips out in the course of the story, watching his hero do these things that he thinks are all wrong.
Whoa.
So this is years before they assassinated Captain America.
Yeah.
And I also, then my plan after that was that Cap would be replaced. I was going to replace him. I wanted either Sam Wilson or this other character of mine called Black Crow, who was a Native American, to take over as Captain America. Well, they later did Sam Wilson as Captain America. But actually, I think what I finally landed on was Black Crow, because I loved the idea that a Native American, the first true Americans, now the Native American is going to be Captain America, which would have brought a whole other thing to the book. But that was never to be. And 20-something years later, I did a story for IDW called The Life and Times of Savior 28, one of the best things I've ever done. It took the seeds of that story, planted them in a universe of my own creation, beautifully drawn by my buddy Mike Cavallero. And we got to tell that story and expand that story and deepen that story, And yet I sometimes look back and think, man, if we had done that with Captain America in 1983, that would have been something. But everyone run out now and buy a copy of The Life and Times of Savior 28 because it's a great story.
So that's interesting. So yeah, I found the Black Crow interesting. So he could have possibly replaced Steve Rogers then.
Yeah, that was my plan. That was my plan. Yeah, that was what I finally landed on. Was like, I'm going to make Black Crow Captain America after the assassination of Steve Rogers. Yeah.
That was very interesting because not only Native American, but there was like a mystical component there.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly. So it would have been really, really interesting. And who knows? Maybe someday someone will still do it, or maybe I'll come back and I'll do it. Wouldn't that be fun?
Oh, Marvel let him do it. Hey, did you see? I guess now they're doing like instead of like one and done what if issues, they're doing like what if miniseries, like a series of miniseries.
No, I didn't know that. With what if characters? Oh, really?
Yeah, because they're the first one now. It's once again they're doing what if the Venom symbiote had possessed Spider-Man and he couldn't get rid of it. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So I mean, if nothing else, they could let you do that as a what if. It's like
to actually do that story the way it was going to happen. That would be interesting. Or just a simple what if Black Crow became Captain America would be kind of cool. Yeah.
Especially with what if. I mean, there's no limits to that, is there?
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. I didn't know about that. That's a really cool idea.
But that's so funny. 1983. Oh yeah, we would never replace Steve Rogers.
Yeah, I think they more objected to the pacifist strain of the character. Because really what I realized after thinking about it is you have one of the fundamental characters, if not the fundamental character of the Marvel Universe. So what are superhero comics ultimately about? With all the psychology, with all the spirituality, with all the philosophy that we layer on top of it, it's still about a couple of guys punching each other. That has to happen in every story, So if you have one of your fundamental characters saying, you know what? that's really not right, and it's not the way to go, and it's not, it's not what life should be, it's not what stories should be. You're essentially challenging the fundamental assumptions of your universe there. So, and that was one of the things I was going to play with, that the other characters couldn't quite wrap their heads around what he was doing. Why are you doing this? So I can understand the objection from that point of view as well.
I think you were just ahead of your time, because I could see them doing that today. Yeah,
right.
Back then, I guess they couldn't wrap their heads around it. I think the closest they ever got was that original Nomad storyline. He's like, "Oh yeah, I'm dropping the shield, but I'm going to put on a different costume and just do the new costume."
Right. Yeah. But the idea of like, how do I? And the thing is, as anyone, if you read Savior 28, you'll see the idea is, just because someone decides that they're going to tread this new path doesn't mean it's easy. And if your whole life has been about solutions through punching and hitting, you don't just abandon that. Those reflexes are always there. And how do you struggle with that? And how do you fight with that? There's a scene in Savior 28 where he's giving a speech at a peace rally, and then of course one of his villains shows up. And by the time the thing is over, he's ripped a tree out of the ground and smashed it over her head. And he realized, and the whole audience, who's supposed to be a bunch of pacifists, are all applauding. And then he's completely humiliated by what he's done, that he realized he's just sold out everything he's been working for. So it's that struggle. It's not just like, I'm going to be a pacifist. It's like, well, how do you really do that in the real world? And especially in the real world, quote, real world of superheroes, to put that in quotes. So it's a fascinating theme and a fascinating story.
Sorry, I'm writing this down to remind myself. Savior 28.
Okay. Life and Times of Savior 28. Yeah.
Okay, Life and Times of Savior 28. All right, kid. Yeah, so check that out. I was gonna go somewhere I completely forgot.
Well, go someplace else.
But no, I was gonna say, who we need to see in live action somewhere? I think it'd be great is Vermin.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would love. Someone suggested this to me a year or two ago, and I thought, what a brilliant idea! Because talk about doing Kraven's Last Hunt as a Spider-Man movie. Well, right now they have this kid. Spider-Man's just a kid. He's in high school. So Kraven's Last Hunt, you need a mature Peter Parker. Yeah. He's married. He's older. He's more mature. And someone said, imagine if they got Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst, and they got them back together for a standalone, one-off Kraven's Last Hunt. Just not part of anybody else's continuity. Just tell that story. And I thought, God, that's a brilliant idea. That's a fantastic idea. And I would love to see that. And then, of course, you get to see Vermin. Or, I've written a lot of the DC animated movies. I would love to see Marvel just do an animated movie of Kraven's Last Hunt.
Oh, yeah.
I would write that in a heartbeat. I would love to see that. And, Vermin's a great character. I brought Vermin back during my spectacular Spider-Man run with Sal Buscema, and sort of deepened and explored that and found the roots of his trauma and his psychological stuff. And he's a great character who I really love.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I think Lilith and I are going to be talking The Child Within. Probably might not be like November. Would you be willing to come back and talk some Child Within?
Oh, I would love to. That's one of my favorite things that I've ever done for Marvel. Yeah, absolutely. Like
I said, it's not like it's more like towards the end of the year. So
yeah, that's fine. And who knows, maybe by then they will have finally collected it. That's one of the great mysteries of my professional life, is why that run has not been collected. We've had a story here, a story there. And then people send me editions from, Italy and South America and all these other places where they've collected it, but never here. So I would very much like to see that. Love to see that run collected, especially that story.
I mean,
Child Within story.
I mean, weren't they promoting that too? Because I read that when it was new. Weren't they promoting that as like the unofficial sequel to Kraven's Last Hunt?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't know why they collect that.
Yeah, it picked up a lot of. In fact, I would love to see some monster edition with Kraven's Last Hunt, Soul of the Hunter, which was the first sequel, and then The Child Within. That would make a really great, complete story.
Oh yeah,
great. Marvel, if you're out there and listening, you need to do that. You really need to do that. As if Marvel is like this guy. Hi, I'm Marvel. Oh, that's a good idea,
Mr. Marvel, please.
That's right. That's right.
So here, I'll let you go in a little bit here. But the thing I wanted to ask you at the end. Okay, so
yeah. Hang on 1 second. My chair. I have one of these chairs, with the little thing on the side to raise it, and as I sit at it, it slowly sinks. So from the beginning of this conversation to where we are now, I went down about 3 inches.
Yeah, that's why I had to get a new chair. Yeah.
Anyway, your question. I'm sorry.
What I was going to ask you, I mean, for an assignment, and you're just kind of given. At the end of your Captain America run, did you see Captain America in any different kind of light, or did you learn anything about Captain America at the end of your run?
That's a good question. Just not so much learning any. You're always learning when you're writing these characters because you're discovering more about them month to month. That's the great thing about working on an ongoing series. And I was on that book for like 3 years. You really get to breathe and tell big stories and get to know these characters so intimately in a very different way than if you're writing a miniseries or a one-off or whatever it is. You spend time with them. And in those days, everybody kind of stayed on books a long time. When I started at Marvel, I think I was on Defenders for 3.5 years. I was on Marvel Team Up for like 3 years. I was on Captain America for 3 years. You stuck with these things. Oh, yeah. And you really, really, you embedded yourself in those characters in that universe. So I don't know whether I learned anything. I learned to love and respect Steve Rogers in all kinds of new ways. I got to know him. And I say this, and I don't mean it as a joke. With these characters that you spend time with, they become real to you. Same thing with Spider-Man. I mean, I've written so much Spider-Man, and Peter Parker to me is like, I know him as well as I know my best friend, maybe even better, because I know what's inside Peter's head all the time. So they become very real, and there's an intimacy between writer and character that stays with you. So I still look back on Steve Rogers like, oh, I haven't seen Steve in years, but it's my old friend, from way back then, who I knew really, really well. So it becomes less a learning thing than a sort of a connecting over the course of that time.
Well, that's interesting because it's like, okay, could you just sit down at the time and be like, okay, I got to think like Steve Rogers there, or is there something you did to like get in the mindset? Did you read like issues?
It become in the beginning, especially in those days, I used to read everything. If I got a new book, if I was on a new book, I would reread the stuff I'd read. I'd dig up stuff I hadn't read. I would read everything. Plus, it was just a great excuse to go out and buy back issues and have more comics in the house. So there was that. But really, what happens, once you get in the rhythm of it, it all becomes intuitive. I don't have to sit down and go, I'm going to think like Steve Rogers or Peter Parker or whoever. It just becomes a part of you, and you just kind of slip into that. And then the characters, as I said earlier, is like they have their own lives. And when a story is really going, the story takes on a life of its own. So then what's the greatest part of writing is when the characters kind of step up and surprise you. When I'm writing and I go, I didn't know it was going to do that. I didn't know it was going to say that. How did that happen? I love being surprised by my own stories and my own characters because I know if I'm surprised, then the readers will have to be surprised. Because if I didn't expect it, not writing the story, then something good is happening here. And that's the best part of the writing process when we sort of release this stuff from our unconscious onto the page and it becomes something, even though the whole thing is created from our own thoughts and imagination, it becomes something completely independent from who we are and takes on a life of its own. And that's the greatest thing about writing for me.
So is that just like the writing muscle, or is it like if they said to you today, okay, we need you to sit down and write a Steve Rogers story, don't worry about current continuity, it could be time, could you just sit down in like 5 minutes and start writing a story about Steve Rogers?
I don't know about 5 minutes. I would need a little time to let because it's all still there in the unconscious. What I've learned, I use this example. When you watch a dog, when a dog is about to lay down and they walk in circles for like 4 or 5 times, and then they just plop down. That's sort of for me the writing process. I have to walk in circles around the story to allow my unconscious mind time to work on it. And I think if someone said you want to write a Captain America story, I'd walk in circles, metaphorically, of course. Although sometimes, you're literally walking in circles. And he would emerge, the Steve that I knew would emerge and then would merge with who I am today versus who I was back then. I'm working on another project now that I can't talk about, but it reunites me with old characters that I wrote some time back. And it was the same process. I have to kind of slowly allow myself to get to know this person again. And then, boom. Suddenly you're in there again. Or at DC right now, James Tucker and I are working on Justice League Infinity, which is a continuation of the Justice League Unlimited TV series that I
Yes.
wrote for back, 15 years ago. And so suddenly, oh, I know these. Oh, Martian Manhunter. I've written him so many times over the years. Well, maybe I haven't written him in 10 years or 15 years. But suddenly he starts talking, and I know exactly who he is, and we have this union going on, So that's the way it is. You kind of give yourself a little breath. I even remember when Giffen McGuire and I did, formerly known as the Justice League. We hadn't done our Justice League together for like 10 years. And suddenly we were doing this reunion book. And it took about 3 pages where I felt like, I don't know if this is going to work or is this going to suck. And then suddenly, bang, everybody was there. They all started talking to each other and off we went, And that's what you hope for. So I think if I had a chance to write Captain America again, same thing would happen. It would be a little bit of walking in circles, and then Steve would emerge from my unconscious and we'd be off.
Is that like the good problem to have, is like maybe it takes you a little longer to find the voice for each character because you've written so many characters?
Oh, that's interesting because, I don't think the voices don't get mixed up. It'd be like mixing up your friends.
But it just takes maybe just to get in the mood or remember.
Yeah. But that's true of any story, even if it's not an established character. When I'm working on something new, I have to always, unless there's such a the funny thing is if there's a tight deadline, the process that might take you a week, you can do in an hour because you have to. And the unconscious just speeds it all up. But, I talk about Savior 28. I had that idea, started with Captain America in the 80s. I worked it and reworked it from like 1983 to 2008 or something like that, when I finally sold it to IDW. And yet when I sat down to write it, after living with the story for all those years, the first thing that gave me pause was, I'm not quite sure how to tell this story. I had to walk around it because the other, we have to make these choices as a writer all the time. What's the narrative voice? The narrative voice is the key to the whole thing. And you can tell a story so many different ways depending on what voice you choose to be the door into that story. And what I finally came across was this character who was sort of the Bucky of the story, who had been Savior 28's partner back in the 40s, who was now this older guy working for the government, very kind of bitter. And he started talking in my head, and he became the door into the story. So that even though I had lived with that story for whatever it was, 25 years, I needed a little time to walk in circles around it till the right voice clicked up, So it's a fascinating process. That's the stuff about writing that I love the most, because no matter, I've been doing it for so many years, and it's still a mystery. And the mystery is a joyful thing. I like the mystery. You can never quite pin it down. I give writing workshops. If anyone is interested, you can go to my website, jmdmatteis.com, and look in the workshop section. And I talk about all the things I've learned over 40 years of being a professional writer. But one of the things I talk about too is that there's always an element of mystery to how this stuff is created. And you should embrace that mystery. That to me is the joy, because there's something magical and mystical about what we do. We're creating universes out of our own unconscious mind, and it's as much fun for me or more than it was the first day I started writing.
So what would you say is like the big key for not even just like people who are already writing, but people who want to get into writing, just get in there and start writing and just practice, build that muscle? Yeah.
The thing I talk about a lot in my classes is the power of will in the creative life. There's talent, and then there's will. And you have to have a fierce will. You have to want it more than anything. You can have all the talent. I've seen people with a lot of talent, but they don't have the will. And at the first sign of rejection, or they make a couple of attempts and it doesn't work out, and they go, they can't handle it. I've seen other people where maybe the talent was here, but their will was up here. And they worked it and they worked it. And if someone slammed a door in their face, they just went to the next door. They kicked the door in. And, they practiced and they practiced and they practiced. And then their will and their skill, found their way to an equal level, because their passion was so high. You have to have that passion, and you really have to have a strong will. And the other thing you need is a really thick skin, because it doesn't matter how long you're doing this or how successful you are. Rejection is part of the freelance life. It just is. Every idea that comes out of my head doesn't get sold. Or the example I gave you, it might take 25 years to get sold, And when they slam that door in your face, it doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. There's always a part of you that's like wounded by that, So I always say, go crawl under your desk, shake your fist at God, curse the gods, weep, gnash your teeth, bang your head against the wall, then take a deep breath, come back out and create something new. Because that's Harlan Ellison, I think, said that's the weapon we always have as writers, is that we can always start a new project. We can always do something. It doesn't matter what they tell you, you have the freedom to create, and they can never take that away from you. So a fierce will and a thick skin. Very, very handy.
Okay, I think that is the perfect point to end on.
Okay, great.
All right. So once again, thank you so much for, giving me your time. You're always very generous with your time. Again, the plugs, the class, anything else you want to plug? Yeah, please.
Well, for the workshops, just go to my website, jamesdematteis.com. There's a bunch of things that I'm working on that I can't talk about, but Justice League Infinity will be out in July, I believe. It's a 7-issue series. It's sort of season 4 of Justice League Unlimited. And if that goes well, hopefully we'll get to do season 5 and season 6 and on and on. We're having a great time with it. So I think that's it.
And the Life of Times of Savior 28. I know I'm going to be doing a search.
Yes. You can certainly get it at Amazon, and I'm sure if you have a local comic shop, I'm sure they can order it for you from IDW. Yeah.
All right. So just check out your website, because you always seem like you always have something coming out, or you're doing something.
Yeah. And you can find me on Twitter and Facebook and all those places.
All right. Well, again, thank you, sir, so much.
My pleasure. Great to talk to you.
Always love talking to you. All right. Again, I will get a hold of you towards the end of the year for Child Within. So watch.
Oh, yeah. That'd be great. Let's come back for that.
All right.
Take good care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.